Kate, and I have the great privilege and pleasure of running Halcyon. We really appreciate you all joining us here today, and for those of you who aren't quite aware of what Halcyon is, we are a unique nonprofit that provides space, community, and access to emerging creatives of all types. Here in this building, we incubate amazing social entrepreneurs from around the world that are tackling issues as diverse as clean energy, education, healthcare, you name it. And over in the Halcyon Arts Lab, which is located in the old Fillmore School, we do the same kind of program, but for artists interested in social change and social justice. Alongside that, I'm just going to plug, we have a huge festival this summer called By the People. I want to see all of you there, and there's no excuse because it's completely free. It's going to be all over Washington, D.C., and the goals are to make sure that it is free and inclusive and substantive and bridge building and bringing us together and unifying us at a time where that's sometimes strained and difficult. We have some incredible artists from around the world involved, including Nick Cave, who's doing a one-off installation in the National Cathedral underneath the Rose Window. The Anthem is going to kick us off with Ray LaMontagne and Nico Case. The Arts and Industries building on the Mall is going to be filled with some really incredible art. And there's free transportation around the whole lot. So I'll leave it there. I could keep going, but pick up a postcard on your way out, and please do register and learn more about that. I love this series. Fast Forward is after my own heart. I think Marla and I and Sachko, our co-founder, really wanted to focus a light on women visionaries. Women entrepreneurs, women founders, women policymakers, and anyone who is really thinking out to the future in an interesting way. There are so many, and we wanted to be part of making sure that they get showcased and highlighted. So this has been a really interesting series so far. We've got more coming in the fall, and it is my pleasure to introduce Marla Beck and today's guest, who is also a Marla Bee, which makes phone calls very difficult. So all I have to say about the two Marlas is that they are both people that when you meet them at a party, you just want to dive in their heads and stay there for a little bit and explore what it's like to be Marla Beck or Marla Blow, because they are both extremely fascinating people, incredibly intelligent, and I'm very interested to hear what they have to say today. So welcome to the stage.
So I've never gotten to say my name before.
Hi, Marla.
Welcome, Marla. We're so lucky here today to have such a visionary entrepreneur, leader, and thinker. Today we're going to talk about the future of money, and we have Marla Blow, who is the CEO, president, and founder of FS Card. She's a leader and expert in the financial sector. She helped stand up the Consumer Protection Financial Board. She was also a senior leader at Capital One. She's been in investment banking at Morgan Stanley and JP Morgan. She's a director of Care.com, founded by another amazing female entrepreneur who I know very well. And was a Henry Crown Fellow at the Aspen Institute, which is an incredible program and honor. She holds an MBA from Stanford, a BS in economics from Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, and she was profiled by Vanity Fair as one of the 26 women of color disrupting and diversifying entrepreneurship, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So please join me in welcoming Marla. I'm excited about her discussion. And I'm going to say Marla as much as possible because I've never done it before. You've had an incredible journey and background to come to where you are today, which is founding a revolutionary organization and company. Tell us how you got there.
Yeah, not the easy way, for sure. So I guess part of this really for me starts with thinking deeply about what I was kind of hearing as anecdote floating around in the world. And if you rewind back to 2010, I had been at Capital One at that point for about 7 years, and I got a contact from someone who I'd worked with even earlier than that in my career at Capital One, and he said, you know, I'm going to go start a government agency, and it's going to be focused on consumer finance, and you know stuff about consumer finance, and it's local, and you should come, right? We need you to help us start this. And I said, I don't think so, right? That sounded like a pay cut. It sounded like, I'd been in DC probably for about 6 or 7 years at that point, met lots of people who worked for the federal government. None of them ever start off with like, it's super awesome and you should come, right? Like it's kind of not the dominant narrative about that. And so I said like, no thanks. And he said, okay, well, before you give me your final answer, let me introduce you to someone. And he said, just stand by, I'm gonna set up a phone call for you. And I got the true kind of federal government phone call that said, please hold for Elizabeth Warren. And I was like, I did not know who that was at the time. And I got on the phone and I got an opportunity to get introduced and speak with Elizabeth Warren about her thinking about American families, about what happens to people, about the journey of making financial decisions. And about 5 minutes into that 15-minute conversation, I thought, like, I guess I'm gonna leave Capital One and I'm gonna go work with this woman. Right? Because the opportunity to work with someone that has that much clarity of vision and that much sort of specific, relevant experience was just incredibly compelling, right? And it really inspired me to take that leap. And I'm so glad that I did, right? That made all the difference. And then in my capacity I joined US Treasury. At the time there was no Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and we helped build it. And so the opportunity to create a new government agency from scratch turned out to be just sort of one of those eye-opening, kind of mind-boggling, life-changing experiences. And part of my role there was to be the liaison between the Bureau and active market participants. And over again, I heard from people as I was going around to talk about what was going on in credit markets in particular, which was what I ended up running policy for, is that they were not offering credit to subprime consumers, that they can't afford to do it anymore because of Basel III capital requirements, can't do it anymore because of the creation of the CFPB, so you, Marla, are part of my problem. The financial crisis has scared us all away. And I kept saying like, okay, well, somebody should do something about that, right? That means there's a giant opportunity in this space, and there's a ton of money to be made there, and most importantly, those are people that still have a need to borrow, and they are accessing credit. The need for money, the need for liquidity doesn't go away just because the instrument goes away. And they're likely trading down to things like pawn shops, auto title loans, and payday loans. And I sort of kept saying, again, somebody ought to do something about that. And then finally, after saying it enough times, someone called me on that and said, well, I think maybe I know who that somebody might be. And so you should go off and start. Let's go start a credit card company.
Who called you?
So I got the same guy that called me and recruited me out of Capital One had left the CFPB and started a venture capital firm called Fenway Summer. His name is Raj Date. He's now the chairman of the board of FS Card. And he said, I'll put in the first $300,000 and you leave your job at Capital One and let's go start a credit card company.
Did you have to think about that?
I had to, so I should have thought about that because, because $300,000 is not even close to the amount of capital that would be needed to start a credit card company. But it did mean that I didn't have to go and find the first dollar, and finding the absolute first dollar is incredibly hard. So that gave me a little bit of runway, a little bit of an opportunity to build a very, very small team. I was telling Marla earlier that we started the company in Georgetown on Thomas Jefferson, right there in the basement of a townhouse. There's some people here who were in that townhouse with me, and we were able to kind of get this off the ground. But with that kernel of an idea of identifying this market opportunity and just deciding that it's not okay with me that those people get left on the sideline without access to a traditional product, that even my former team at Capital One had said, we no longer offer this kind of credit. And I just couldn't stand by and sort of let that stay true.
So most entrepreneurs don't say, I'm going to go start a financial services company. What are some of the challenges you had? This is a big sector with a lot of competition, and
it doesn't really lend itself well, at least in this particular space. It's a very difficult place to start a credit card company, and the challenge really is there's no kind of minimum viable product, right? So for people that are thinking about entrepreneurship and have followed kind of recent literature on entrepreneurship, there's the, who's the entrepreneur that coined the phrase, if you're not embarrassed by your first prototype, you've been working on it too long?
I don't know.
I think it might be Reid Hoffman, right? And in the online world, you can create a site and draw people to it and then improve it, and the next time they come, it's better, and they kind of forgive the bad experience on day one. A bad financial experience is unlikely to be forgiven, right? You are interacting with someone's sort of heart and soul, right? Their true bread and butter. And that means building all the infrastructure, having all the capital, building credibility, and ensuring a quality experience from day one is paramount. And so it meant, in our case, we spent about a year and a half. We spent over $2 million building all the infrastructure, getting all the contracts in place, setting up servicing, right? Somebody has to be able to answer the phones. Somebody has to screen every transaction and make sure it's not fraudulent. Statements have to go out, payments have to be collected, right? All of those pieces associated with the credit card have to be in place before we could issue card number one. And that is the thing that makes this incredibly difficult. And then even after getting all of the infrastructure in place, we then needed the go-to-market capital. So we actually had to have the money, because in this case, money is actually the raw material, right? Money is the input. And getting the money to be able to allow the customers to draw on the card was the sort of final step in building the whole thing.
Let's talk a little bit about the build card, and then we'll come back to sort of entrepreneurship and some of your theories. So your first product, the build card, can you tell us about what it is and sort of how you got it up and running?
Yeah, so definitely part of the theory was to create parity, right? So I wasn't out creating like in this case, kind of the future of money, a newfangled form of a credit card or credit card on a device or anything like that, because there's part of the population that just didn't have the same plastic that all the rest of us walk around carrying and using, or choosing not to use, but still have every day, and wanting to create that same everyday experience for a population that unfortunately too often found themselves without that kind of access. So it was really about creating a card that I'd be comfortable having my mother, my niece, any member of my family go around and use in place of a payday loan or other kinds of liquidity instruments. So we went out and did some research and spent some time scouring the market and kind of looking at what was out there. The average payday loan in this country is about $350. So a couple of key features, right? One, we wanted to make sure that it was enough money to at least solve whatever problem was being solved with a payday loan, that could now be solved by the build card. So we set a $500 floor, and if you didn't qualify for a $500 card, then we weren't going to lend you the money, right? It felt like it needed to be sufficient enough to make a difference. But also importantly, having too much access to credit, especially in parts of the population that we're serving, is not necessarily helpful either. And so we wanted to make sure that it wasn't so much access to credit that the credit itself became a new problem, right? And so, so much of the discussion in this country around credit cards is, you know, I've gotten myself into 5 figures of credit card debt and I'm never going to figure out how to get out of it, and, you know, what's that story and how to interrupt that cycle. Right. This is the opposite side of the coin, right? This is getting a toehold, getting a start. If you use it well, we report, you know, we always report everything to the credit bureaus, and used well, it gives an opportunity to get other credit card offers and move and get migrated into kind of the financial mainstream.
And how do customers hear about this card? How do they find out about it?
So one of the challenges is we have to know something about these customers up front, right? So if we put up a website and say, you know, all ye with challenged credit come here and try to get credit from us, we will get a lot of takers, right? There are lots and lots and lots of people who are looking for that message and want to come. And what we didn't want to do is set up yet another opportunity for this customer to get turned down. Right? And that is a recipe for us to turn down a bunch of people. So we invested in doing analytics, in accessing data, in building our underwriting engine, and building the capability to identify upfront who is on a trajectory that suggests they are ready for the product that we're prepared to offer. And we send out good old-fashioned direct mail. So the junk mail that shows up in your mailbox is not at all junk to some people who don't see these kinds of offers. And almost all of our accounts have been pre-selected in that way, right? Pre-approved customers of ours. And they meet a set of criteria that we've established and continue to refine over time. But it is a lot of legwork, right? And doing the analytics ourselves.
Is more competition coming in now that you're doing this? Or?
There are new players now up and running, and in some ways I feel proud of that, right? Because we sort of set the tone, right? And at the time when we started FS Card, so think back to 2013, 2014, there was every marketplace lender out. So if you think Marla Lending Club, Prosper, right? These are names that if you're in the financial services space, you might have heard of some of them. Those were kind of the thing du jour, right? And the idea was it was capital light. You don't need to sort of eat your own cooking. It gives you the opportunity to kind of be up and running quickly and not have to build all the infrastructure that we were building.
Right.
And so people kept saying, like, well, why are you doing this, right? You've been at this for a long time and you haven't started yet and you've spent a ton of money and this seems super hard, right? Like, why don't you do something else? Why don't you start why don't you start a marketplace and you'd be up and running? And I thought it was actually important to create this product because this was the gap.
Right.
And now all of those marketplace lenders are talking about getting into the credit card business and trying to find ways to issue this kind of revolving credit to this population. And I'm also excited to see more people serving this market, right? So while I do worry about competition and I worry about too much credit getting awarded, I am excited to see more people trying to solve problems for a part of the population that too often just, again, gets ignored, right? It's easy if you are a tech, a tech innovator, to sort of work on programs and problems that are proximate for you, right? And oftentimes the idea that people don't have access to credit is just not something that they can relate to, right? They don't know anybody that doesn't have credit. They can't even imagine that that's a possibility. So paving the way, right? Demonstrating that there's a need out there, right? And getting other people to join in means it makes our jobs a little bit harder and we have to be a little bit better about what we do. But it also means that we've kind of set the tone, which I really like.
And you've raised well over $30 million and maybe more at this point. Talk to us about some of the challenges with raising money for a credit card. I'm curious about that. And then we've also had a discussion about raising a lot of money versus raising a little money.
Yes,
so
exactly.
I'm curious about how you think about that.
So it was probably, I'd say by far, one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. Was trying to get the money, and in particular, raising the money to go to market, right? Yeah. So after the initial $2 million was mostly from friends, family, supporters of mine, right? Like people that I kind of knew. And then we set out to go find $10 million. We needed $10 million to, about half of which, maybe a little under half of it, was going to be spent actually lending to the customers. So this is money that is going to be burned, essentially, right? It's going to be used to actually make loans. And it was really, really hard to find the institutional investor who would write a check of that size and who was willing to kind of be the day zero risk taker on this platform. And it's mostly because it's just not the kind of business that lends itself to get big fast, create a new category, the things that a typical venture capitalist is looking for. So we were the stage of a venture undertaking, but we were not a good fit for a venture kind of investor. And so what I ended up doing, I talked to probably 200 people. Everybody. I talked to everyone. I definitely recommend not talking to everyone, right? It does not do you a lot of favors. The wear and tear is profound. But I talked to everyone. Everyone that had any kind of money, I was talking to them. And I quickly realized I should have, if I could go back in time, right, I would have done a lot more segmenting of the market, right? Try to figure out if you've never invested in financial services, I probably don't need to try to convince you that you should start with a subprime credit card product starting from day zero, right? Like there's a big gap, right, from I've never done this before to let me go and do this. Another thing is $10 million was what we needed to start, but we were going to need a lot more money than that to actually deliver on the entire vision. And so one of the big concerns for a lot of investors is, my capital is going to get stranded, right? I'm going to be $10 million in, nobody else is going to come in, and it's not enough. So no thank you. Right. So I had to find someone who was going to have deep enough pockets that they could buy the entire vision, and that they knew they had enough money to be able to fund the full journey, and not just the 10 million. So again, very hard to find that party. And ultimately, I one day called up one of my old bosses. So before Capital One, before Stanford, I was a little analyst sitting around in New York working at a French merchant bank called Banque Paribas. And I had a boss whose name was John McCormick, who I still know and keep in touch. And one of the things I would share is that I actually have been pretty good about keeping in touch with people. I highly recommend that. Even when it was hard to keep in touch with people, it's relatively easy to keep in touch with people now, right? You can link in and all kinds of ways of keeping in touch. But I send out handwritten holiday cards to like 40, 50, 100 people over the course of my life. And so everybody that I wanted to keep up with had some contact with me at least at the prior holiday season. So they kind of knew a little bit about what was going on or just kind of kept me in mind. So when I called up John, he didn't have to go like, what? What, Marla? Vaguely. He remembered, and I called him up and I told him what I was doing, and he said, you know what, I'm now at a place called Tricadia Capital, and we just started a special opportunities fund. Let me introduce you to one of my colleagues, whose name is Jim. And Jim might be interested in this, I don't know, but I can send you over there. Right. And so I went and I met with Jim, and Jim ended up putting in the first $10 million. Wow. So that was how I originally got the money to go to market. And then subsequent to that, Tricadia has put in 30 million more on top of that. So that, finding the deep pockets, finding somebody that was willing to take that early stage risk, someone that was willing to bet on me because they knew me, which was an important component of this, but also new financial services. And that all needed to come together to make it work.
And what's your dream for where the build card goes? Sort of, how do you think about this is how I define success?
So one of the things I think is missing in the space, especially in the part of the space that we play in, is a brand, right? Like there are people that offer various kinds of credit to subprime customers. And there are companies that have built gigantic brands, right? Capital One comes to mind, among others. But there aren't any brands that are really specifically focused on this customer base. And I think in part it's informed by the fact that a lot of the participants in this space are not that happy about what they do. They don't want to stand behind it. They're not necessarily that proud of what they're doing and the way they treat those customers. And I think the opportunity to sort of be proud, right, and stand behind and hold my head up high and say, I serve this customer honorably, I serve this customer respectfully, I serve this customer because it is a value proposition that I firmly believe in. And bring that to life, right, and create not just pure sort of I don't have any other alternatives, but make this the preferred alternative because it stands for something and because it's been a quality customer experience and because people know they're getting a fair shake. That's something that I would love to be able to do. So the idea of building a brand and continuing to propagate it. I would also really like to add a follow-on card, right? So the build card is designed to help you build credit and build a path back into the mainstream. Thank you. There's a lot we can do with it. But we'd also love to see people have, the flourish card or the thrive card or the success card, right? Or whatever the next step is. Sure. And it's not an evolution off of the build card, right? This is something that will reflect the journey that this customer has been on. Yeah. And every time they reach for it and say, like, here's my thrive card, they can remember that they have actually been on a path. So we'd love to introduce a product like that. I should add, the Thrive card exists already. Somebody already has the name, so it won't be the Thrive card. But
don't give away all your secrets.
My head of marketing's in the back, so if you've got an idea, you should tell him the name of the future card, the Empire card. There you go.
But you bring up an interesting point. This sort of lending has a bad rap, especially with the concept of payday loans. I mean, in Congress, they're talking about there's a huge fight to get rid of payday loans because they're bad. So how do you think about payday loans?
So I take a bit more nuanced of a position on that, right? And it's mostly informed by having been inside of a government agency, right? And seeing that you run the risk of making decisions and picking winners in a space where you don't necessarily know all the competing issues on the other side, right? So from where I sit, I can look at something like payday and say, I would never pay that much. People using it must not know or understand it. And it must be bad. Something bad must be happening. Right. But the problem is, if you make decisions like let's just get rid of it without thinking about what that leaves, you create a different problem, right? You create the problem of scarcity. And in particular, when it comes to, borrowing is as old as time itself, right?
Sure.
People were borrowing when it was sticks and stones in a cave or something. You give me 2 sticks today, I promise I'll give you 3 back next week, right? And I think the important thing is to make sure that there are rules, that there is sort of adequate clarity going on the way in associated with the product, and that there is sort of something that aligns the incentives of the provider, right? So you don't want to be in a position where the company is better off if their customers fail, right? Like, or if their customers are worse off. And I think if those things align, you allow customers to make decisions, you allow the market to work, they will create the right kinds of outcomes, right? So I'm not one of those people that's sort of pounding the drum on must get rid of payday, right? Because there are a lot of people for whom payday is the difference between maybe eating dinner or not, and maybe getting to the work or not, maybe feeding their children or not, right? Like, and I'm happy to not have to make those kinds of trade-offs, but I want the people that do need to make those kinds of trade-offs to be able to do so safely, right? And that's my position on it.
We talked about another interesting challenge that you'd like to tackle at some point, which is financial literacy. And you have a great story about that, and I'd love to bring sort of your thoughts about this challenge.
So one of the things I feel strongly about, I would love to find some form of financial education, literacy, intervention, something that's effective, right? I haven't seen an effective version of it, and I'm not sure why, right? I know we don't include it in our curriculum in school, right? So you turn 18 or 21 and then you wander out into the world and start making financial decisions. And what happens is people make the same bad financial decisions when they're young. I was telling Marla upstairs about a bad financial decision of mine, which I won't regale this group with, but so I'll tell you a different story later. But young people of all shapes, sizes, colors, and sort of class make the same generally sort of bad, generally sort of irresponsible credit decisions in their early days. And what happens is there's something that I've decided to start calling the reset, right? If you are affluent, middle class, et cetera, right, your parents, most of the time it's your parents, they show up and they say, okay, you have made a mess. I'm now going to clean this up for you. And they go and they pay off your credit cards or your, whatever it is that you got yourself into. If you are not affluent, you don't get a reset. And if you don't get that reset, what happens is you go off on this trajectory outside of the general financial mainstream, and it's very hard to get back, right? There's very few return points to that big middle. And I consider that very problematic, right? And if we can help people make better decisions in their early days, you can intervene in that cycle. And it's something that I think needs a lot more airtime. The story that Marla and I were talking about is I was watching a story about a professional athlete who was really proud of his accomplishment, and he had been drafted into, the NBA, the NFL, whatever, right? Like pick a major sport, right? It's a big deal. And he got a check for $375,000. And it was the first time in his life that he had ever gotten like a meaningful amount of money, and that's a meaningful amount of money. And he went to a check cashing outlet in his hometown, right? Like, because that was what he knew. He didn't know anybody that had a bank. He had never been to a bank. They looked at him and they were like, dude, we can't do anything with this, right? We probably have never had $375,000 in this store. If we did, we wouldn't give it to you for you to walk out of here with it, right? Go get a bank account. But he had never, no one told him that. And so there are things now that are in place to intervene for, athletes get education about it when they're coming into large sums of money, et cetera. But it's a problem not just for, that's an extreme example, right? But it's a problem for someone getting their first $1,000 from their first job, and they might do the same thing. And I would love to see something. And I've thought about trying to figure out how to dedicate energy to it and get involved in that and find ways maybe to make it a part of the build card story. But I think it has to start at a relatively young age, because that decision making, those first few credit decisions are so important. Right? They can really set the tone.
Yeah. So I want to switch gears for a minute, because this is a really important point. So you were just profiled in Vanity Fair with a bunch of other amazing female Black entrepreneurs. And this is a sector which is one of the fastest growing sectors of entrepreneurship. What do you think is going on? Why this excitement right now?
So I'm hoping that it's the beginning of a realization that there are multiple ways to build a career, and that there are multiple opportunities for people to sort of stake out ground for themselves. And what I'm hoping is that it means there's willingness to take risk, right? And willingness to take risk is it's a very hard problem, especially, I think, for many African Americans and African American communities, where you might be the first person in your family that's gone to college, might be the first person to have, a quote-unquote good job, and there are people counting on you, right? Like, there are people who need you to help them, make whatever month they have, go around. And letting go of that job, right? The sort of the golden handcuffs, or the liquidity that comes along with sort of stability and reasonable amounts of compensation, is a big risk.
Yeah.
And taking that leap is hard. There also is sort of a narrative, right? A story, a profile of who an entrepreneur is. And in general, that face doesn't look like mine. Hoping by things like Vanity Fair there will be more broader representation, that you don't have to have on a hoodie in order to be an entrepreneur. That doesn't just happen in San Francisco. Yeah. That can happen anywhere, and that there are multiple models for doing so. That it doesn't have to be this, get big quick, get big by burning through a lot of venture capital money. That I think is a little bit of a false story, right? That people have been led to believe that success means having raised money, right? Like and I'm pretty sure that my investors don't think it's successful that they gave me money, right? They very
Not
much,
yet.
right?
Not
They
yet.
want that money back, and they want it back many times over, right? And that is so I'm really hoping that more people will start to think about entrepreneurship differently, and think about who it applies to and who can stand for entrepreneurship in this country a little bit differently because of that.
You come at entrepreneurship with so much experience. So
yeah.
I went into Bluemercury with zero experience. And I know, it's a challenge, it's a debate. How do you think about that?
Yeah, so for me, for sure, you guys have probably heard, right? The entrepreneurial journey I've been on has absolutely been informed by my entire history,
Sure.
Including, and probably most importantly, the ability to raise the capital that I've raised is entirely informed by having built up a track record and built relationships over long periods of time, and network, exactly, that I think would have been really, really hard to pull off when I was 25, right, or 27 years old. I was also able to convince people, I needed a bank partner in order to be able to issue credit cards. I needed servicing when I had 0 cards, and I promised them, like, you should sign up and be my servicer, because one day this thing is going to be big.
Yeah.
But it's not big right now, and I still need you to sign this contract. And the ability to get people to believe that and be willing to enter into these agreements with me is entirely, again, informed by having had experience, by having been in this space for a long time in multiple capacities. And I think that really made it possible, right? I will say, right, and one of the things I am aware of is the opportunity cost of being entrepreneurial and starting something entrepreneurial in your, mid-40s. I'm going to hang on to mid-40s till the bitter end, so I'm going to say I'm still in my mid-40s. This is sort of peak earning years, right?
Yeah,
and sort of taking that leap means getting off of a certain track. And that has a cost, right? Yeah. And I'm hoping that will pay off, but the cost is sunk at this point. So, it's one of the things that sort of mitigates it a little bit. But I obviously benefited entirely from the experience.
Great. So think of your questions. I'm going to open it up in a minute for questions, and we'll take questions from online too. We're streaming, so hi streamers. Lightning round, so I always love doing this, which is you got to tell us about a favorite book or a book that you're reading right now.
Okay. Favorite book. So I guess one of my favorite books that I read recently, I read Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, right, who founded Nike. And the thing that I loved about it is that he made it such a personal story, right? And it wasn't just entirely about the company, but it's also about him and the setbacks that they experienced. He's incredibly humble about telling it. And, you know, for all of you that haven't read it, you don't know how close we came to not having Nike, or to having it be called something like Section 9 or something weird that he didn't want to call it Nike, right? And it was just one of those stories that for an entrepreneur, right, for someone going through the ups and downs, for all the near death that comes along with building something from scratch, it was incredibly important and incredibly powerful for me to read that book and to read his journey. It was wonderful.
What do you do for yourself when you have downtime?
So I was thinking about this question. My son was asked, you know, what does Mama like to do? And he said, Mama likes to work.
How old's your son?
He's 7. He'll be 7 soon. And so that made me realize, like, I need to get something, right? I need to do something besides work. When he was very, very small, he woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning for the first 4.5 years of his life. And it started to get old real fast, right? That he was going to be up at 5 o'clock in the morning every day. But one of the things I did was I would get up and take him in his stroller and go out walking and go walk around our neighborhood. I got to know everybody that has a dog. I got to know everybody that walked to the train station, right? Like, I got to know everybody that walked around in the mornings. And it became something that I started doing it because I needed to pass the time with him, and get him out of the house was useful. And now I don't do it because I don't have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning with him. But I miss it, right? Like, and I miss that time, right? And the world is very quiet at 5 o'clock in the morning, and the ability, it sort of cleared my mind in a way that I didn't really appreciate was happening until I stopped doing it. So that's, I guess, one of the things I would like to start doing again, is getting up, that's right, and going for money. I actually did it yesterday, so there you go. There you go. Thank you.
And the best piece of advice you've been given?
The best piece of advice I've ever been given. So I was told by one of my colleagues from the CFPB that had been doing something entrepreneurial before, and I convinced him to come to the CFPB. He told me that doing something entrepreneurial only ends when you decide you can't take it anymore, right? Like, there is pain, there is disappointment, right? Like, there are really, really tough parts of that journey. And you have to be able, and the difference is whether you continue or don't continue. And there's nothing wrong with stopping, right? Like, it's just a question of sort of what is your threshold for pain. And I think that story sort of shows up in multiple places, right? You can quote the great boxing prophet Mike Tyson, right? Who said, you know, everybody has a plan till you get punched in the face, right? Like, you're gonna get punched in the face. And it just depends on how many times you get back up, right? And the ability to get back up is the difference.
Elon Musk said being an entrepreneur is like eating glass.
Chewing glass, yes. I've heard the chewing glass one, exactly.
But it's also the greatest thing ever. So.
Yeah, it brings it home, for sure.
Yeah. Great, okay. Questions? Anyone? Yes.
My name's Catherine Woolley, and I have spent most of my career in indigent defense and legal services. So representing folks that aren't qualifying for your card and aren't going to get a Thrive card.
Right. Not right away.
No. In Baltimore City, across Maryland, and a little bit in D.C. They exist on a barter economy. They exist in check cashing places. And when I look at it, it's so chaotic and it's never maintained. I guess I could ask you a million questions, but I kind of have 3, which is, 1, the ability for financial services to aggregate resources along families. We make personal credit decisions, but you're living with family resources often. The second is, I think we too often, and our modern day economy, well, modern day everything, pick either it's a matter of personal responsibility, or we feel bad for the person and say, oh, they can't control it. It seems like there's a middle ground.
Right.
It seems like, to your point about financial literacy, that we could be talking to folks about making sustained decisions, so you're not going out when you have a little bit of cash, renting a car,
Right.
25% interest, and that car's gone in 6 months.
Exactly.
And the other just is about technology, and I know that's so broad, but I was at something at Georgetown a couple weeks ago. A woman was speaking about China, and she said, there's actually an app that you can give folks, that homeless population, you can give money to a homeless person on the streets of China with an app.
On an app, really.
Where is the ability of our smartphones to maybe aggregate those resources? I know that's incredibly broad, but like I said, I could ask many more
Great,
questions.
all three.
Yeah, it seems like the main question is how do we serve the population that won't be served by the build card?
Yeah,
So.
the true sort of the margins. So one of the places we've been investing recently actually is looking at populations where there's no data, right? So the populations that you're talking about where we can't pre-screen them, we can't run credit metrics against them because there's no information, right? They just haven't used anything. And one of the important things we did was just test it, right? Just put some credit out there and just sort of see what happens. And unsurprisingly, a lot of people didn't pay us back, right? But we learned a lot of information, right, about this population, and that there are pockets, and we can segment, and there are pieces of information that are actually useful in splitting risk. And so just drawing a hard line and saying, I will not lend or will not serve this population is too broad, right? It's too broad an approach. And being willing to take that scalpel to identify where within this population can we play, and can we play there safely. That, I think, is the challenge that people have to rise to, right, and be willing to step in. You talked about sort of what's systemic versus what is the individual responsibility, et cetera. So this is a place where I've spent a lot of time, and in a lot of work I've done at the Aspen Institute, we've talked about what are the problems that can be solved by financial products, and what are problems that are just systemic problems, right? So if you have too much month and not enough money, there is no financial product that can solve that problem. If you have volatility, meaning you sometimes have more hours, or you do seasonal work, or you have some reason to expect that liquidity is coming, there are financial services that can help you sort of smooth that out. And one of the things I thought going into this that our customers would think of a very bright line difference between a payday loan and the build card, right? Because we think so differently about them and have invested so heavily in it. But what we've discovered is that our customers just think about, I need money right now, right? Like, and what are the ways that I can get it? I can go get a payday loan. I have this credit card. They have some savings sometimes, right? And people surprisingly don't really think about money as fungibly as I do, right? They think about it as, well, if I use my savings, then I don't have it anymore, so I actually prefer to use credit, right? And have a balance for a specific reason. Or they might say, like, the money I'm saving is for me to pay for camp for my kid, and if I don't have the money for that, I can't send my kid to camp. And so I will do everything in my power to avoid touching that money, even if it means going to get a payday loan, right? So there's a lot of mental gymnastics going on to try to solve problems where financial tools can be useful. Where there are systemic issues, we as a nation continue to vote for this stuff. I would love to see us change some of our voting habits. Maybe that's happening. But for now, right, this is what we've chosen collectively, right? Like, and that is a different problem that I don't think can be solved by financial products. I do want to add one more thing on technology, right? I think technology is one of the most interesting things to arrive on the scene of financial services. And one of the things I've been worried about is that I mostly see people thinking about, like, I can create a super slick app that makes it easy for incredibly well-served, mostly sort of well-to-do people, do something slightly more conveniently, right? 5 minutes, you can apply for a mortgage while you're sitting at a basketball game or whatever, whatever the Rocket Mortgage ad is. And that's not an exciting use of technology to me, right? Like, it's great. It's a great story. It's probably great for them. They probably, are really happy about that. But the ability to make it possible for someone to use banking services despite living in a neighborhood where there are no banks, or living in a country where there are no banks, right? Or very few, or banking is only for the elite. Those are things that are really exciting and where I think the prospect for technology is really encouraging. I do worry that people are being compromised on privacy and the use of their data in exchange for access to some of those services. But on balance, I think it's overall very encouraging and very promising.
Great question, thank you. Oh, where did you wanted to take one from online? We've got, oh, they need the mic here.
No.
1 second. We're gonna get the digital audience going. Yeah.
Okay, so one of the questions online, do you see a scenario where cryptocurrencies can benefit the underbanked or financially vulnerable population?
Yeah, so this one comes up a lot. I guess I have to say I don't know and I am suspicious, right? I'm skeptical, I should say. And I guess I say that because in general, anytime the recommendation is you over on the margin should use this alternative thing while all the rest of us use this other thing, like the thing on the margin is almost never good. Right? It's almost never better or creating sort of a new solution. It is ripe with opportunity for problematic kinds of outcomes. For the moment, as far as I know, cryptocurrency still has to be turned into some kind of legal tender in order to be able to eat, pay for clothes, right? Like go buy gas. And so it feels to me like it's extremely premature, right? To think that crypto is the right answer. And crypto isn't a resource that just sort of, although people talk about mining and and Bitcoin mining, et cetera, in general it does get created out of thin air, right? So you're trading in and out of this medium in order to transact.
Sure.
It's also extremely volatile, right? So while you're trading in and out of it, one day it's worth $5,000, the next day it's worth 300, and then it's worth 5. I mean, you are taking massive risks. So I would wait a lot longer to see that market mature and try to figure out where and how it can be useful and how it evolves in this country before I'd say like that's promising and it's a good answer for the underserved.
Great.
From my point of view.
Great. Did you have a question?
Yeah.
I know. Yeah.
So I'll just yell.
Here, we'll take the mic. I want to make sure everybody can hear you.
I will repeat it after you.
Oh, right. Okay. Hi.
Hi.
So what advice would you give a single mother raising a child, this is me, who wants to do their own thing? I want to do my own thing, but I am solely responsible for raising my child, so I have to bring in the money. So, and then I also want to put the time into her so that my end product is a successful quality product for when she gets older. So what advice would you give?
So a couple things. One, I'd say go for it, first of all. Second, do not be afraid to hire someone to do everything in your life for you. So I almost never cook, clean, do my yard. Like if I could find somebody to service my car, like come pick up the car, take it to the thing, like bring it back, I would do that too. Yes, exactly. Somebody invent that. There's probably an app for it now. Because it's the time that I would otherwise spend cooking, cleaning, doing laundry, whatever, that I can actually spend with my son, which I really love getting to do. And I heard a woman that I know who's older and is now retired told me a story about when she'd been an entrepreneur. She sold one of her companies and thought at the time, I'm gonna stay home and spend more time with my child now, right? And she was just sort of making this up, right? Like she wanted this, and she heard her daughter talking about her, and her daughter saying, my mom's the CEO of this. And she was bragging, right? Like she heard her daughter kind of leading with this story. And she realized that her daughter was getting the benefit out of her working that she hadn't been aware of, right? That this actually meant something and was important to her daughter in a way that leaving that behind might not have actually served her daughter. So she went and did another company and run that and sold that as well. So you never know, right? Like what might be beneficial to your kid and what the psychic benefits are. The other thing is, in general, at FS Card, I have attempted to integrate my life and my family into the workplace. So when we have social events, they happen during the day. We don't socialize in the evenings. We don't have holiday parties on weekends. Like, go home, go be with your family. We socialize for work-related purposes. It happens during work time. We have had Halloween events where the kids can come in, wear their costumes and trick or treat around the office, in each office, et cetera, and made it feel like it's a comfortable place for you to be able to balance your life and your work, because that's important to me, right? And so it's been nice to not have that feeling of, I need to go out for drinks, because if I don't go out for drinks, then I'm not participating in social events, et cetera, right? If we are gonna have drinks, we're gonna have them at 3 o'clock, and then the drinks are gonna be over at 6, right? You can go home and do whatever you need to do. And so I think it can be made to work, and the nice thing is if you can set the tone, then you can set it up in a way that works for you.
What about the financial aspect?
So financially, it has been helpful to have some kind of cushion built in, right? So this is, again, the difference between being 25 or the very beginning of your career. I was telling my admin was asking me about, would I go back in time? And I told her, like, before my 30s, I didn't make enough money to feel like I would ever want to go back to that time. But having some kind of cushion is actually a huge help, because you will likely need it. I can't pretend like that's not a consideration. It's a big one.
Yeah. Great question.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you think it's at all viable to integrate, at least at a local level, some kind of barter system for people who really don't have access to cash?
So perhaps, right? I haven't given that enough thought to have an opinion on it, but there are things that are springing up that I think are really interesting, like borrowing circles, right? And different cultures call it different things, right? But most cultures have groups of people get together, they pool money, and then each person in the group gets the collective dollar amount of one time during the month. They do it over the course of it's 12 people, they do it over the course of a year or something like that. And there are organizations that are systematizing that undertaking, right? And making, lending circles, I think that's some folks are calling them, a more robust thing. And in some cases, even reporting that to the credit bureaus so that it can become a path to building other kinds of credit as a follow-through on that. Barter seems pretty tough, but there are things that sort of stand in for barter these days, right? So for example, you can get, now, I talk to millennials, not a millennial myself, but talk to lots of millennials who have little lines of credit or little things that they've borrowed all over the internet, right? You go to this merchant online and you use some kind of credit provider at that merchant, and you go to this merchant and you use another one, and you go to this one and you use another one. And I guess the theory is you're not building like sort of giant piles of debt and you're paying each one down. That seems to be a thing that's appealing to some people. Again, it's not quite barter, but it's sort of similar in that you're sort of exchanging with that particular merchant. I think it would be difficult, but there's probably some interesting things to do to get people together to exchange what they need and what they can offer. I don't know.
Interesting question.
Kate's making a list of ideas that we're generating here in the room, so we're going to come up with new companies.
I'm Rhonda Fahmy, and I'm a new entrepreneur, about a year old, and I'm particularly,
Congratulations.
Thank you, interested in what you had to say about education, about debt, about financing, because I know I have a 20-year-old daughter. I'm trying to teach her about the checkbook and credit cards and interest rates.
Right.
But anyway, the question I have for you is, one of the social purposes of the new company that I founded is paying down the U.S. national debt.
Oh.
The U.S. national debt is $21 trillion,
right?
And most people don't know that it inordinately affects women of every generation, because we're the biggest beneficiaries of all the programs that are going to be cut if our country doesn't pay
it back. Yeah.
Both parties aren't doing anything about it. That's the reality. How do you suggest that I educate my consumers and my customers? It's a beauty brand, Marla. It's called Makeup America. And I donate $1 of every product purchased, lipstick, nail polish, to pay down the U.S. national debt. I just wrote my first check to the U.S. Treasury. So how do you suggest I package that to educate women about the U.S. national debt?
Wow. It's a big one. I love that idea. So kudos to you
Beauty
for taking
and
that
finance.
on. Exactly.
What's better than that?
Make it go together. Exactly. So definitely one of the things that I've learned over time is is continuing to talk about it, so exactly the way you just did, right? Find opportunities to get that message out. And it has been over the course of the 4.5 years of building FS Card to get to the point where I get invited to come and speak at events like this and get that message out to broader and broader platforms. If you're more social media oriented, you can probably take some shortcuts and do some of that a little bit sooner than I did. But being willing to talk about it and talking about it all the time, right? And talking about why this is important to you. And people can tell if you mean something and if it's important to you, it shows, right? Like your enthusiasm just now kind of shows, right? It leaps off of you. And it will sort of cut through the clutter, right? And it'll stick with people. And so I would really encourage sort of lending your face and lending your voice to, even if it feels like you're shouting in the wind, keep shouting, right? And eventually it starts to pick up momentum. Because it's a fantastic idea, right? Like, and it's one of those things that if you have to chip away at it a little bit at a time, right? The likelihood that we're going to pay down $21 trillion all in one fell swoop is basically zero. And it's going to have to happen through stuff like that, right? There's an interesting parallel, just add an aside. I was having a conversation with one of the members of the St. Louis Federal Reserve about deleveraging, period. It wasn't about the United States, but it's about deleveraging in our society, right? And that we don't have, and not just in our society, but in our world, there are not good examples anywhere of countries or individuals that have managed to sort of run up large amounts of debt. In this country, we have large amounts of consumer debt in addition to the national debt. And it has gone up and to the right forever. The only time it ever interrupted that pattern was during the financial crisis, right? So that was kind of a violent dislocation where a lot of people charged off and had to be written off. They had to have their debts written off or file for bankruptcy. But where is this going? Right? Is this going to go up and to the right forever? And if it isn't, by what means is this going to ever start changing course and come back down, right? So I'm not just a debt peddler, right? Like I actually do think about how to make it productive and where is it going, right? And I don't have any answers to it, but I think the question is important.
I think we have time for one more question. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Abigail Woodward. I've been hearing about public banks, and I've also been hearing about the closing of a lot of bank branches and how we could use the post office. And I don't know enough about it, but those seem like really interesting ideas. How would you educate me on that?
So I'm all for that, right? I think, so there's been a lot of people who've suggested, and if you go to other parts of the world, the post office does all kinds of things, right, that our post office does not do. And there's no reason for that, right, except that we have a lot of incumbent banks already who don't really want the competition. And the post office is subsidized by the federal government, right? We pay postage, but it's heavily subsidized by the government. And if you are a commercial entity and you know how you face now competing with an organization that is subsidized by the federal government offering your exact same services, you are concerned about your ability to do that and do that economically. So I guess I would say there are very interested parties on the other side of this argument. And that is one of the determinants of why we don't really have this today. That's my opinion entirely. I should also say that is not the opinion of the CFPB, just in case anybody thinks I'm speaking on behalf of the CFPB.
Right.
But it is, to me, it's an incredibly compelling thing. And one of the ways it shows up is people still use the post office for money orders quite frequently, and they're quite cheap. But if you need to go and transact in cash or go pay something in person, there's just no reason why that can't happen at the post office. It's worth adding, though, post offices are being closed as well. It's not just bank branches, right?
Yeah.
In rural communities in particular in this country, post offices are closing, and in a lot of cases, that was the only thing in the town, right? And the loss of the post office really meant hard times, really was a hardship for a lot of these places. So I don't want to pretend like it's that the federal government is as committed, is more committed per se, but certainly the potential is sort of huge, right? And I think it's a big missed opportunity that we don't do it, right? Frankly. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here today. I think I speak for all of us when I say we're so excited to see what you do and appreciate your leadership and vision in the financial sector. And it's been an amazing discussion. So
Thank you. I
thank
appreciate
you
it.
all. You're an amazing.
Sorry, I was so riveted I forgot to close. And just repeat Marla's thanks. Thank you, Marla. Thank you, Marla. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We do have coffee and water, and you're more than welcome to stick around for a few minutes and meet each other. If you have residual questions for anyone, feel free to come to the front. I'm sure that we have a little time. And I hope that you check out the Fast Forward series in the fall and everything else that Halcyon has to offer. Thanks. Bye.